Okay, so at this point, we've gone and looked at the system that we're going to play with in CyberHub. But if we go look at what is it we've dealt with so far, we've talked about Active Directory, the fundamentals of it, Active Directory domain services, and we're going to install this in this module. Designing the infrastructure is what we're going to do next. Now, I would love to go through and deal with DNS on our virtual machines. We're not going to be able to because of the deployment of the machines, how they've been provisioned or configured for us. Now, there's something that, from my understanding, they're geared towards a cybersecurity application that they're designed to have people work on, or have students work on, to practice securing networks, not configuring and setting up and designing networks, which is what we're supposed to be doing. And we're going to do it. We'll just do it our own little special way. So DNS. Now, let's talk about what DNS is first. So DNS, domain name server. So essentially, let me back up before I say essentially what it is. Let me back up. So a domain name is the name that a server associates with some structure on that server. So we could say google.com. That's a domain name, google.com. And that structure within google.com has all kinds of resources available. And when I go to google.com, depending on the port that I go to, there's different things I can access in that domain. So when we think about it from an Active Directory standpoint, we said Active Directory is where we manage these resources. The domain name server is where it's a server that essentially says, I'll get you where you need to go. You got a name, I'll give you a number associated with that name, and that'll get you where you need to be. Now, it's kind of like how our phones work. Now, if we think about our phones, our cell phones, if I want to call somebody, I've got a call list on my device, right? And it's a local file on my device that I can access, and all I have to do is select that individual by name, and it will connect me with them via their mobile device number or their phone number. Now, that's kind of what takes place when I go in and I type in google.com. I can go up, type in the URL google.com. On my local device, I have a file that's much like my contact list on my phone, and my system goes and looks in that file to see, do I have an IP address resolved to or associated with google.com? If I do, great. Just like me hitting the contact list, make the call. Connect me to that resource. If I don't have that IP address, then what happens? Well, it's kind of like me having to phone a friend. I don't know somebody's number. Well, I know a guy, he's got everybody's phone number. And I'll call that guy DNS. That's what happens on the computer. I've got an IP, I've got a domain name, google.com, but I don't have their IP address, and I need the IP address to talk to them. I reach out to a DNS server, and the only job that DNS server has is resolving names, domain names, to IP addresses. That's it. So when we go in and we look on our virtual machines, and you'll see where I went and did it in the DNS install video. It'll be the second video after this one. You'll see when I went in and ran ipconfig, those virtual machines have 2 DNS servers already allocated for them. And if I want to reach out to some domain name and I don't already have that on my local file to resolve, my system will reach out to, it's almost like phoning a friend. It'll reach out to DNS. DNS says, oh, here you go. Here's the IP address for that guy. And if it doesn't know the IP address, it's got a friend it can reach out to or point you to, depending on the situation. So there's always somebody that has the IP address. In rare instances, I can't resolve that name to an IP address. It's not a valid domain name. That could happen. If you mistyped something, no, it'll come back with some web host saying, hey, do you want to buy that domain name? Odds are that's what you'll end up getting, or unresolved. So when we say, what is DNS? That's like our contact list. But there's a server that's all it does. That's one, I shouldn't say that's all it does. That's a role that the server has. And that could be the only role that server has. But what I was hoping to do with our servers that we're dealing with was to set them up as DNS servers, and we could interact with them on our little network. We don't have to. It's absolutely a simple task to go set it up. One of the things with Server 2022, and now I pushed to migrate to this version of server, and these virtual machines we have, they run on Server 2022. One of the things you'll see when we go to deal with the Active Directory configuration on the system that we're dealing with, that virtual machine, it's clearly 2022 data center server. If we go in and look at the software associated, it says that's the version of server we're dealing with. But when we go to configure it, 2022 is not an option in there. 2016 is. Essentially, what we're dealing with, for the most part, in Active Directory has not changed very much. It's very little has changed in the last 11 years, from 2012 to now, or I should say 2012 to 2022. That's the duration between the versions that I'm talking about. Very little changed. I mean, not anything really noticeable in the Active Directory part. We'll see some things, but the interface, almost identical. And when we go to set this up, you won't even see 2019 or 2022 as an option in the dropdown. On a 2022 machine, the option for server is 2016. That's the default configuration for Active Directory. So we'll talk about it when we get to it in that walkthrough video. So let's get back and we'll talk more about DNS here. So DNS is going to resolve the IP address to the domain name that's in question. So I've got the root level, that's the name, Google.com. So root level is the name, level 1 is the extension.com, and then we may have below it sub areas, level 2, level 3, as we drill down into that root. Okay. So there's a hierarchy in the naming, and it's dot, dot, dot. So it's root.net, .rebeladmin, .forum, and we just move down through the layers. Okay. So each one of the types of domain names, whether it's .com, .org, .net, they're all, you can't just go say, here's what I want. There's a few that you can get, but most of them are reserved depending on what country you're in or what type of organization you are. Okay. Now, we went through what it is, how it works, and it's just like your contact list. It really is. And like I said, you reach out and you hit your server, the server doesn't know it, reaches out to a resolver, and there's a lot of back and forth. Essentially, you end up with what you need, and you go direct connection to your destination. Now, this back and forth, it was checking to see if what you're looking for was all legit. If it was, here you go. This will work for you. Now, depending on how low a level, how deep you're going in, is how long it's going to take and how many connections there are in this. If it's something it already knows, you'll get it straight away. Out, back, here you go. Not sure about it? We'll go up and resolve it. Let's check here, check there, check there. So the infrastructure design, and that's kind of what we're going to do next as we move forward, is create the domain and come up with the structures down below it. All right, we'll do that in the next module. Now, that's what we're going to do here as we deploy that infrastructure. But for this chapter is pretty much about having the records to say, here's what you need and where you need to go. Now, with that said, the different types of records will have different stuff associated with it. Let me see. We're going to set up the different zones. We'll set up transfer zones. We'll come up a domain name. We'll set up the forest and all that. We're limited on what we can do relative to the forwarders and those kind of things because we're not actually doing DNS on our server. We can't configure the policies on it. We'll just lay out the structure on it. Talk about transfer zones next go when we actually implement them. Forward and back that we're going to set up. and we'll see the similar structure when we go in to configure our domain. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. You're going to spend some time going through, watching the next few videos to do the install on AD. Got it broken down. The first video will be a real light install of Active Directory. We're not going to do deep dive configuration on the first part of it. The next one, we'll go through and do DNS just like we maybe could configure it. But then once we do that initial install of it and we don't fine tune it, we just do the basic install, then we'll back it out. Because we don't need it sitting there. But at least I can walk you through how to go add it in. If we wanted to, we could do ADDS and DNS all in one fell swoop. I didn't do that because we're a little hemmed up with the whole IP address DHCP aspect of it. All right. So with that said, I'll see you in the next video where we do the ADDS install.